Hey guys, I am starting the podcast today and I'm super excited about the subject matter. We've been talking about really basically starting over again. And we dealt with a kind of a litany of different things the first podcast. And what was our second episode on? What did we talk about? Do you remember? Our
Uh,
episodes, my content flow is running together. But today we're going to be
yeah.
talking about breaking free from the past. And
Mm,
we're evidencing that by forgetting our last podcast.
yeah.
We're breaking free, y'all. But this
Yeah,
is
I don't
such a
remember.
huge point. Everything that we try to do at Mind and Body in this podcast is we're trying to help you optimize your life.
Mm,
And a lot of people have a really difficult time doing that because they're just so stuck in the past. Not all of it's bad. And matter of fact, I want to start with something that I read by, I think you pronounce his name Luke, um, but it's probably not. How do you say Luc? How would you pronounce that name?
yeah.
Is
Luke.
Luke?
Luke Ferry.
Yes. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, Luke Ferry. He wrote a book called A History of Thought, and one of the things that he brings out in the book is the tendency for people to be stuck between expectation and nostalgia. He
Yeah.
says this. He says that most people live trapped between nostalgia for the past and expectation for the future, missing the present entirely. And I think that's very true. And because people have maybe a foggy understanding of the past, but there's maybe some nostalgia there. There's some things that kind of makes them feel happy and makes them feel, or maybe just melancholy. Like it's kind of melancholy
Hmm.
mixed with some happiness. Some people will describe nostalgia as being like this kind of this warm feeling, But generally, we are going to talk about the dark side of nostalgia. But generally speaking, nostalgia is what most people would say is pretty positive. And
Correct.
I was looking at like just some basic articles on this particular subject, and it was a article called "Patterns of Brain Activity Associated with Nostalgia." This is by Yang and colleagues, and basically they say that nostalgia is a sentimental longing for the past, often triggered by memories of meaningful life events or important people. And there's a huge psychological role to nostalgia.
Yeah.
The way they put it is nostalgia can buffer against psychological threats by enhancing well-being, social connectiveness, and meaningness to life. It can give us a future orientation. Despite focusing on the past, nostalgia can motivate a future orientation of behaviors, goals, particular in the interpersonal domain. So, anyways, they basically said, hey, it's very positive. It can be very helpful. Um, but the issue with nostalgia, and I'm curious of your thoughts. I know you've been doing some study on this, but nostalgia tends to kind of rewrite the past, making it seem better than it actually was. Like it
Hmm.
highlights the good, it kind of cancels out the bad.
Yeah.
And that's why it kind of makes us feel good, but it can highlight our circumstances. So it's almost like beautiful memories, but a little bit of sadness because we're like, man, I wish it was like that. And
Yeah.
it can give us a false view of the future. We're like, we want to repeat that. And what I've seen happen for a lot of people is and this is true of older folks. Now, if you're an older person or categorize yourself this listening to the podcast,
Tread lightly, Don.
I'm not trying to hate on you, but what can happen is they can think of the golden years
Yeah.
and they can really come up. These were the years that were the best, and or maybe this is the best time in America or whatever. And they want to see that repeated, and they forgot that the golden years were really bad too. Like it had a lot of
Right. They had bad aspects to
exactly,
them. Hmm.
and they want to repeat that in the future. And sometimes it's like, hey, like times have changed, and instead of
Right.
trying to force and just be like, man, this was so cool back in the 1950s or 60s or even back to the 40s, whatever. That's cool, but now we're 2025, and instead of
Hmm.
trying to impose that nostalgia on the future, it's kind of like beautiful years of the past, but let's look to the future. But there's this being trapped between these two things. can cause you to miss out on life. And we don't want you to do
Yes.
that. So, Amber, I know
Yeah.
you've been looking into the subject of like just nostalgia in the past. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I have to like just touch in on what you just said though. Like, so yes, there's like the older generation, they talk a lot about like the good years. And it's kind of funny because like probably for you, there was like a time in your maybe your childhood or your teenage years that like if you run into something via wonderful social media that like reminds you of the 90s, it brings this sense of like comforting past. Although today I was actually walking through Target earlier today, and for some reason there's a trend of clothing in the women's section that has brought back like late 90s, early 2000s clothing, and it makes me shiver, but it's fine. Uh,
Oh
there are certain
yes, yes.
parts.
Like um like what was it? I know that like the skinny jean era is kind of out, you know, is
Yeah.
going, and then there's like the baggier jeans, even like the baggy jeans with like the holes in the knees type of stuff.
Yep.
I'm not hating on you. I've seen you wear those, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I would
um,
say actually I wear both. Um,
there's you know,
I am
it's
I am a
actually cute
typical millennial currently.
is people will buy flip phones again. I don't know if those are listening. Does anybody remember the
Huh,
Motorola Razor? You
yeah.
guys, do you
My
remember
best
that
friend
number?
had that in high school. Hmm.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I had
Yeah.
it.
I had what they called the brick phone, the Nokia. That was
Guys,
my first phone.
I didn't have a
Yeah.
cell phone until college. That's wild.
I probably wouldn't have had one, but I worked at a summer camp
Uh-huh.
for 4 summers of my high school, and my parents were like, "Well, I guess you need one."
Yeah,
So that's the only reason I had one.
I'm
Yeah.
really glad for the time that I grew up. Actually, like I loved being like born in the '80s, grew up in the '90s. Yeah, it was
See,
just
it's nostalgia right here, folks.
yeah. Here it is, guys. I'm
Here it is.
falling back into this, but actually, again, I just want to say this: there's nothing wrong with nostalgia. Now,
No.
sociologists and psychologists will say there's a huge play on some nostalgia today, and it can be a kind of form, and to use the word that they used, it can be a form of escapism.
Yes,
Like,
that is what I was going to touch in.
oh man, I
Hmm.
didn't mean to steal the thunder.
Literally
Go
that.
for it, Amber. Turning
Yeah,
it
you
back to
teed that
you.
up for me so well. No, so it was interesting. So the longer I have been in like counseling and therapy myself, the more I read about the mind, the way it works, the emotional state. Um, I noticed that a lot of my friends around me, um, they all have a lot of them have some sort of coping mechanism that is like a form of nostalgia, whether it's coloring or playing old video games, from the 90s, the early 2000s. Um, all of these things that, like, when I think about them, I think about us doing them when we were kids, right? Kids, teenagers, I'm going to lump it into kids. Um, because anybody under the age of 21 is a kid. But I really made me start thinking, and so I started doing some reading, including reading this particular article from Harvard Medical Studies, um, and it was a psychological study of like why people do things like adult coloring books, or why adults play video games, or why a lot of adults re-watch over and over again like the same old videos, the same shows and stuff from our childhood, essentially. um and if you're an adult like myself, occasionally you'll pull up Disney Plus, pull out an
Oh yeah.
old Disney movie, and it just, you're not actually interested in the movie. You could quote every freaking line, but there's just something so calming about it. And the study was going off of the realization that we live in such a high stress society, and it's stressful because of current world affairs, current politics in our country, work stress, uh, and like all of these emotional and mental stressors, that we find a peace in this stuff that reminds us of reminds us of our childhood, but we wouldn't necessarily verbalize it like that. Like we just realize, like we just think about, we're able to relax. We're able to tap into like this child like mentality to cope with our current world, our current life. And it was really interesting because um very rarely do I personally do that kind of thing. I have other coping mechanisms though, so don't think I don't need a coping mechanism. But a lot of people tap back into the things that brought them joy when they were younger, and I thought
Right.
that that was really interesting. Um, and so it gives you a hit of dopamine, and it gives you this like mental and emotional safety,
Yeah.
essentially, where you don't have to think about your life right now.
Right. Right. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
where this
That
could
was a
go,
very simplified version of the article that I read, but yeah.
let's see, like, there's a man and he's middle aged, and
Mm-hmm.
don't you dare say I'm describing myself, Amber. No, I'm just kidding. But here's a man who's middle aged, and he sees somebody in their youth, like being very ambitious, and it
Mm-hmm.
reminds them of a younger version of themselves, and it could trigger nostalgia, and that's not bad.
Yeah.
But what you do with that nostalgia, it could lead someone to say, man, I love that ambition. And maybe it kind of creates a sense of like, hey, I've kind of lost ambition and I want to rediscover myself at this stage of my life. Or
Yeah.
um, it might lead to like, hey, I still have ambition, but it's tempered by wisdom now. Before I
Oh,
was ambitious and
thank
stupid. Now I'm
thank the
ambitious
good
and a little
Lord.
bit more
Tempered
wise.
by wisdom.
Exactly. But some people, and this is where it kind of goes to the dark side of nostalgia, is like it can lead to what, this is not a technical term in the depression literature, but like some have coined it as um, a nostalgic depression,
Mm-hmm.
where you just become depressed. And it's like, when you eat sugar, this pairs into the body real well. When you eat sugar, it's like this high, and you're like, duh, this is great. I love this sugar. It feels so good. And then there's a crash.
Right.
Nostalgia has something similar.
Yeah.
There's this dopamine hit, and this is why there's somewhat of addictive nature to it. It says there's this warm, great, happy feeling, but if we don't recognize it for what it is, a good happy memory that you can enjoy, but probably not completely accurate, um, then you realize like, hey, there's a happy moment, but if I'm not careful, it can lead to something that makes me feel really depressed because it's like, oh, I just don't have that anymore, or I wish I was young again, or whatever. You can fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And so I think nostalgia can lead to a good place, but you got to keep a good perspective on it. It's kind of, I heard this quote basically that says something like, your past is a place to reference, but not to reside. So you don't want this to
Ooh.
be like the residence that you stay in all the time.
Yeah.
It can inform your future. It can fill you with excitement and adventure, yes. But then it's like, you know what? There may be new adventures in the future that's not going to look like the past. And I'm okay
Mm-hmm.
with that because that's the adventure of life.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that letting go, enjoying the past, but not living in it, when you let go of that, it's a freedom. It's a true freedom that you can experience. So, like, so how do you kind of get there? Like, what would be some good ways to like I don't know, enjoy the past? And sometimes we're talking about nostalgia, but there's a much harsher version of the past too, like trauma, like a traumatic
Yeah.
experience that doesn't have any type of like redeemable quality to it. Almost, it's like it's just very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
How do you break free of something in the past that maybe was really harmful, or it was beautiful and you just don't feel like you'll ever get back there? What do you think? What's your thoughts? Anything comes to your mind?
So automatically feeling like you had something beautiful and wonderful that happened before and it'll never happen again, you are lying to yourself. And with that kind of mentality, you're not going to have that ever again. And that's where like hope comes in, and like believing that each chapter of your life that you go through can have something wonderful and beautiful.
Yeah.
And you might need to rearrange your circumstances. You might need to learn things. You might need to grow. But if you are happy with the version of yourself that is like right here, right now, then why wouldn't something good happen? Something beautiful and wonderful. Or if you're not happy with who you are right now, then you need to do some inner work, some self work, changing in your mentality, maybe change in your environment to where you can have those beautiful, wonderful moments again. Um, but yeah, if you're constantly looking for the negative and feeling like not that will never happen for me again, it's not going to
Yes. Yeah, that's so
because of you.
yeah. I liked how you started this. I was like, you're lying to yourself. I was like, wow, thanks, therapist Amber over here.
Hey,
Just
look, if anybody knows about lying to themselves, it's me.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's good to see like, you know what, there can be kind of a self deception that takes place here,
Yes.
and it's not like you're intentionally trying to do it. And I think this is where like just reading some of the psychological literature could really help here. There's something that's called cognitive reappraisal, and basically it's a fancy term for talking about reframing the past. So
Hmm.
the brain is wired for meaning. That's why we love nostalgia. It ties us back to
Yeah.
a meaningful experience.
Meaningful.
Um, but we can look at the present and want something so meaningful. But if we're just so caught up in the past, we can actually miss the present moment. So we're missing opportunities for meaning
Yeah.
making because we're so trapped in this prison, right, of the
Yeah.
past. So I like this statement. You can't change the past, but you can change its narrative. In other words,
Yeah.
you can change the way that you communicate it. So, for instance, let's say something happened in your life. Let's lean a little bit more on the traumatic experience. Let's say you just
Yeah.
really failed at something.
Yep.
It was just epic fail, and it hurt other people, and it was with a defining moment for you, and you're having a hard time passing by it.
Yeah.
One way to get over this is be able to actually reframe that story and say, yes, I mean, you could take ownership if you really hurt people or whatever. I'm not saying lie to
Hmm.
yourself, but instead of saying I failed, say, you know what, I learned relationships better. I learned how
Yeah.
to do relationships better, or I learned resilience during that time, or I
Yeah.
learned patience. But like little ways to rephrase and reframe it begins to tell a different story, and it's not John the loser. It's John the one who's learning to live a in a in a way that's more wise. It's on a clear path, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think something um that you need to embrace in like those moments where you have something that you look back and you wish it wouldn't have happened like that. Right. And let's say in this case, like your choices put you through that, right? I feel like at some point everybody's going to do something that they will regret. However, that doesn't have to be a defining portion of your life. And I also think that people need to sit with the fact that this is your first time being a human.
Yeah,
This is your first time navigating life.
and every
You're
stage
gonna make
has
mistakes.
complexities. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
Like to think that you can get through life without making mistakes and to get through life unscathed is it's not human. It's not possible. This is not a TV show. Like this is real life. And having like that acceptance of okay, like this is not great, but this is real life kind of thing, I think is massively impactful on your mental and emotional state.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, like to summarize this point, it's like here's something that happened in the past, and it could be let's say it was a good thing, really good, and it was beautiful, and it's
Mm-hmm.
making you discontent right now.
Mm-hmm.
The way to reframe that is
Oh,
saying, you
I
know what, to appraise that right would be to say, you know what, there was a lot of beautiful things there, but you know what, I'm probably not remembering all the bad. The brain actually has a tendency to blunt out the bad and
yes.
remember like more of the happy memories to blunt out. It actually is a kind of survival mechanism.
It is a survival mechanism.
Is that
Yeah, no, and that's why when people do certain therapy work or hypnotic work, things like that, that bring certain that they light up certain parts of the brain that are normally very quiet. Um, like that's some like deep work, and I like if you have traumatic instances in your past that you can't remember details of, but they're affecting your current future, I would actually encourage you
yeah?
to find a psychiatrist that
Mm,
can help you with that kind of thing. I know somebody who used to be really close to me that couldn't remember a majority of their childhood,
mm, yeah, yeah.
and I was like, "What happened to you?" Because that right there, like when you can't remember a chunk of your life, something traumatic happened to you that altered the way that your brain functions. It altered the way that you think about things. It altered your ability to emotionally process things. Um, yeah, a lot. And that's a sign that you need, you need someone to help you work through that.
Or you play tackle football a lot because it
Yeah.
happened to me. I played tackle football a lot. There's my brother remembers things so much better than me, and I'm like, how do you remember such vivid detail? And I think I got hit in the head too many times playing
Too
football.
many concussions. That's true. Like
Yeah.
actual physical trauma to the brain can do it too.
Somebody sitting here that knows me is like, that explains why John fill in the blank. Anyways, no, I think that was helpful what you said, and
Mm,
like just how the brain works. So it's good to acknowledge like there are certainly beautiful things in the past that actually can help me long for something beautiful in the future. That's good. But I'm going to be honest about it. There were a lot of bad things that happened then too. It was difficult then too. Life is filled with difficulty.
yeah.
And I'm not going to, lie about the past to make me discontent about the present. I'm going to allow the beauty of the past to allow me to look for beauty in the future. But now let's flip it. That's a positive past that's making me
Yep.
discontent. Let's say you have a horrible experience in the past
Mm-hmm.
that's making you feel like I'm never going to break free. I'm just this kind of a person. This is where you can use the power of the narrative and say, you know what? I'm feeling what I'm feeling because I told myself a kind of story that I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a true story. Is there true elements to it? Like you
Sure.
failed at something. Well, sure. But if you frame it as, hey, everyone fails, and I think we were talking about this the other week, like when I heard a business owner just say, man, I like failed this many times in business before I had one company that was successful. You know,
Yeah.
I guarantee you that person learned to reframe their their failures as this is a path to success, right? They learned to have that cognitive reappraisal. And so if it's good past and it's beautiful, just say that was beautiful, probably not perfect like I remember it, and I'm going to look for a more beautiful experience. If it's horrible, it's traumatic, try to tell the story different. Instead of I failed, it's like, hey, I learned resiliency during that time. And actually, that's huge for me with my. I went through, for those listening in, I went through really a career change that came about because of COVID-19 and medical complexity to my child. I had to change really fast,
Yeah.
and I just felt like I was always trying to learn. And if you go from one place where you're competent to an area in a space where you feel like, man, there's a lot of skills I just don't haven't developed because all this kind of
That's so
stuff.
hard.
Yeah, but you know what? I look back on it, it's like, man, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'm so glad what it did. But I'm telling a story about that time that's building my resiliency today instead of saying, oh man, I feel like I just wasted time. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have looked back and said, why did I do that? That was a huge waste of time. I felt like I lost a decade of, you know, doing this, this, and this. But then when I slow down and say, well, look at the people that I connected with, look at the lessons that I learned. I am the
Mm-hmm.
person that I am today because of this last decade that I may not, wouldn't have written that into my story, but it's a part of my story.
Yeah.
And I will say that it also has allowed me to be very empathetic towards people who especially has faced a lot of transitions, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's always
Experience breeds empathy.
there's always a reason for what's happening. And even if you're a type of person who says, I don't believe in an ultimate meaning, creating this kind of thought process and saying, hey, how can I turn this to be meaningful rather than just being empty is going to lead to human flourishing. And so I
Yeah.
want to challenge you to kind of do this type of this work. The second
Yeah.
type of thing is, so you're learning to interpret the past well. That's what we're talking about here, that cognitive reappraisal. The second idea is really learning what's called psychological flexibility. This is living in the present moment,
Yeah.
and um, I think learning to meditate, learning mindfulness. And I know those are really super trendy words, but like it's basically identifying the stoic impression of like there's a lot of things I can't control, but I can control me.
Yeah.
I can't control what happens to me, but I can control what happens in me. And I'm going to allow this present moment. I'm going to allow myself to be in the present moment. And this is where I think it's beautiful because you can look at the future and say, what do I desire to happen? Like, what do I want to happen? Okay, what can I do presently that if I did them consistently would get me to that present or to that future end?
Yeah.
This allows me to focus on what I can control now as opposed to um, just nostalgia, negativity, hoping something happens in the future. It's more of like, what can I do now? If I want that reality, then what
How
would it
do I
look
need to
like?
show up?
What would
How
it look
does
like?
today me need to show up for future me?
Exactly, exactly. But that might start with recentering yourself. Like it may not start with
Mm-hmm.
actually working. It might be like, okay, I'm really going to clear my mind of what's keeping me held back,
Yeah.
whether it's expectation, unrealistic expectation, or nostalgia or trauma. I'm going to really try to process that. And by the way, Amber and myself, we just want to clearly state this. If you're struggling with any of this kind of things, I would definitely recommend going to a therapist. We are just talking
Yeah.
from a practical standpoint of our own lives and study,
Yeah.
but there, I would definitely seek
I
out professional help on
I
these.
wholeheartedly encourage therapy.
Yes, and you, Amber, at this right now in your life, you actually go to therapy weekly, not just because
Mm.
things are rough. You just do it because it's been so helpful to unpack your own.
Oh yeah. No, for sure. Like there was definitely the reason I started going to therapy is because of like um, extreme issues in my personal life and in my marriage. And then, after working through all of those things, I was like, you know what, this is actually massively impactful in my life and is helping me to process through things, even things that I didn't think I needed to process through. Things will bubble up and can be shocking sometimes. And so I told my therapist, I was like, let's just let's keep going for now because um, I feel like I'm able to understand myself better and understand the world around me better. As we dig into like my deeper subconscious.
Yeah,
And I kind of like the thing you were talking about like living in the present, like that is actually something that we've been talking about a lot because I am somebody I actually live in the future a lot. Um, I'm constantly thinking of the next thing and the next thing and like where I want to be,
you
in
and me
three,
both.
5,
We're both cursed
10 years.
like we're like hopeless visionaries.
Yes. And of course, like that's a strength in so many ways. However, when it starts affecting how you show up in your daily life, and I mean in a negative way. Like obviously I show up for future me by holding a really good job. I show up for future me by studying and making moves towards who I like towards the career that I want. That's great. But when I shove down feelings or ways I need to show up for my friends or family, like right here, right now, I'm ruining future things. Um, and so there's this delicate balance, and I say delicate because, like, for some people, it's a lot harder than others to like live in the present. And my therapist pointed out that often we don't the people who avoid living in the present means you don't like where you're at. You're not accepting of where you're at in life. And like that's definitely something that I struggle with is I struggle to accept where my life is right here right now because I'm living in I wouldn't say a particularly painful portion of my life currently, but it's not pleasant. And that's where that's why a lot of people struggle to live in the present, is because they're not where they want to be, and it might not be necessarily painful, but it's not pleasant. And um you're ignoring a lot of things, and often you're also ignoring like places in your self that need to heal, and places in yourself that are crying out. Like that's why you're discontented. That's why you're thinking futuristically, because there's places in you that are crying out that need attention. And it's different for everybody. But I've been learning to work on being in the present moment. And so my therapist was saying, like, okay, let's see if we can identify your distractions that you're avoiding. Um, and so we worked through that, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize that I had such a hard time being alone, like a hard time processing through my junk, like, my emotional things that I needed to deal with. Um, and yeah, so like that's a red flag right there. Like when you can't live in the present moment and you can't process through, and you constantly have to be on the go, in mentally or physically or both. Like that's a really big sign that you might need to slow down and be like, okay, like what am I missing here? What is my subconscious trying to tell me?
Yeah.
And instead of shoving it down, like actually doing the work to work through it. And it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to something that business quote, I think, but basically says, hey, it might have been the Layla Hormozi, I think, that said this, but she said
Okay.
something on lines of like, in your in your free time, um, you can either build the life you want, like in other words, just put the energy into building instead of just, or you can try to escape the one you have. And a lot of people will fill their life with distractions
Yeah.
because it helps them like escape. It's that
Yep.
escapism point. And man, there are so many times where I've just been so fed up that um, I think this is what binge watching is all about. Honestly, we want to
Yes.
escape.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there's nothing wrong with having an evening where you just decide, or several evenings, or whatever you like to do. Maybe it's every evening you say, I want to veg, I want to watch something. It's fun. But I think for a lot of people, it is a type of numbing the current present life that they have. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I want to have good self compassion here. Everyone does this.
Oh,
Probably
yeah.
everyone needs some of this. It's good. It's
Mm-hmm.
helpful. It's not necessarily altogether a bad coping mechanism. Matter of fact, in our anxiety series, we talked about forming healthy distractions. And what we meant by that, like a healthy distraction, could be like, let's say I have a problem and I don't know how to fix the problem, but I decide instead of being paralyzed and going eating a chocolate cake, I'm going to go to the gym.
You
Well,
remembered.
yeah, yeah, but you're going to, yeah, yeah, exactly. But you go to going to the gym
Yeah.
is a distraction from the pain, but it's a productive one, and it's going to help like kind of reset your not only your physiology but your psychology
Mm-hmm.
to help you move forward more productively with
Yeah.
greater creativity and stuff. So I do think all of this is kind of like in balance. The problem is we get crippled by our distractions. We live there so much, and it keeps us from building a better future. And that's what
Yeah.
uh, we want to change our relationship to. I was sitting here, I was thinking about this when you were talking about distractions. I was like, you know what? All of this has to do with relationships to each aspect of time. We're changing our relationship to the past. We're not totally ignoring it. We're just changing our relationship to it.
Yeah.
Um, we're not just saying live totally in the present and forget the past and the future. It's like, no, no, we just want you to be present. So it's changing your relationship to the present so that the
Mm-hmm.
past and future doesn't cripple you. And nothing wrong with being a visionary and looking towards the future. We just want to change our relationship to the future so that we actually don't get so, I don't know, utopian. It's like, oh, the future is going to be so great that we actually don't do what we're supposed to do today to actually get us closer to that vision. And
Mhm.
it's about the relationship to time. And
Yeah.
if we don't steward those relationships well, we can ruin an entire day or an entire week, entire month. Sometimes it could be years, decades, and someone's life can be so defined by a moment they
Yeah.
never learn to change their relationship to. That's that's really interesting thought
It's
process.
very deep.
Just popped in my head when you were talking. I'd like to kind of think through that a little bit more. So changing that relationship to the past, trying to really focus on what can I do now? And it might be recentering yourself. It might be an actual action that you move towards. What can I do now to lead me towards a meaningful life, a happy life? And then I think this is interesting. Have you read much on the idea of like involving yourself in some type of somatic work? Are you familiar with somatic work?
I'm a little bit familiar with somatic work.
So the popular book on this is the Body Keeps the Score book.
I'm reading that currently.
Oh, are you? Okay, okay,
Hmm.
yes. So that book is like kind of the popular level of saying anxiety. Um, yes, it starts in the mind, but it the way to actually release the anxiety of the mind can be through the body. The body keeps the score, and if you can do things like, for instance, just movement. It's scientifically proven that people that move, they just get some good steps in, they go out and they move, they get some exercise in.
Hmm.
It could change their frame of mind where they were
Yeah.
anxious, uncontrollably so. It's like paralyzing anxiety. Now,
Yeah.
or so what some call energized anxiety. Now it's anxiety that you can work through.
Yeah.
Movement led you towards a more creative response to anxiety. It made you more curious as opposed to paralyzed. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of people will do breath work, or
I do breath work.
yeah, exactly. Or
It's
in
very helpful.
yeah, sitting in a sauna, cold exposure. People will
Yeah.
use this. Um,
I am about to get into, what do they call that? Like ice, um, when you get in an ice tub, what is that called?
ice bath,
Thank
cold
you.
plunge. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm going to start getting into that.
oh, the tub with the ice in it. No,
My brain was just like, full of ice.
so this is like the end of the week. Maybe we shouldn't record at the end of the week. We're both thinking like, what's that called again? You know.
Actually,
uh,
I would like to say that I'm very aware currently, but my brain just like paused and was like, huh?
I hate
Had
those.
the
I
I had
hate.
that little like loading symbol happening in my brain for a second.
I was giving this talk one time, and I could not remember like the name of a. I was telling a story about these snakes in Africa, and this is totally
Okay.
random, and I couldn't remember the technical name for it. But I prefaced the sentence by the you know beginning of the sentence. I said, the technical name for these snakes are, and I forgot the technical name. It was gone, and I couldn't recall it. So I just kind of like made up something that sounded ridiculous. I said the technical name for these
You
snakes.
better hope none of those people looked it up.
No. I laughed at myself. I made fun of myself in the talk, but I said the technical name
Fantastic.
for the snakes are the two steps in your dead snake, something like that. I was like, that didn't sound technical at all. I was like, what in the world?
I'm screeching.
And I actually pointed it out in the talk. I was like, that's not the technical name. I
I
forgot.
can't remember.
They all laughed at me. I laughed, and we moved on. But
Fantastic.
it's those moments you're just like you want to have what is that technical title? But
Yeah.
anyways, so I think to kind of recap this in succession, relationship to the past, and really, and I was saying relationship to all of these time aspects, past, present, future, learning to recenter yourself in the present. What do I do now that actually can impact my future rather than be crippled by fear? And then also involving yourself in some type of somatic work that is, and this can be combined with helping you recenter yourself, like whether it's some people might do like a meditation. They might do some yoga, deep breathing, go train really hard. This is one of my favorites. Go for a walk. There's a correlation between a healthy mind and a healthy body. So
Yeah.
these things can help you. So in closing, just to wrap up this episode, I've kind of put my mind to like what would it look like to find freedom here? Because that's really what we want. It's like I want to be break free from the past, live my present to the fullest, and I also don't want to be crippled by the future. What does that look like? I think first and foremost is acceptance. You
Yeah.
accept that the past is unchanging, but your relationship to it actually can change. You can't change the events, but you can change the way that you think about it and how you move forward.
Yeah.
Number two would be presence. Instead of waiting to feel free, take small daily actions and embody freedom. I had a friend of mine who struggled with anxiety so bad, and it was so bad that he couldn't even go into Walmart. It was so bad.
Mm.
So his therapist just said, "Okay, I get it. What I want you to do is just drive to Walmart to the parking lot and then go home. That's all." And the next day, it wasn't the next day. It was like he did that for a week. The next time, it's like he got out of his car in the Walmart parking lot, and then it was walk up to the store and walk back to your car. And then a couple weeks later, it was I just want you to step in the store, and that gradual exposure actually began to allow him to conquer some of that anxiety, and now he's fine. He still has moments of like I'm in a store, I feel anxious, but he's learned to just to recenter himself with taking
Yeah.
those small daily actions. The,
Yeah. Let me tap into that for a second,
yeah,
because I want people to hear what you just said, because I think it was actually deeper than we thought. Um, because a lot of people think, well, if I can't just like force myself to do the thing, then like I'm not going to do it at all. So it's like it's almost an all or nothing mentality, except for you don't think of it as an all or nothing mentality. But like um, people who like jump into the fitness world and they're like, okay, I'm going to go 5 days a week, uh, and I'm going to go all in for an hour at the gym, all of these things. Um, and like if they miss a single day, then they quit. It happens a lot. And so like whether it's a habit, whether it's overcoming an anxiety, like you just said, it doesn't have to be a light switch change. Like sometimes, and especially if it's something that like is a really big deal, it brings an emotional reaction like anxiety or something along those lines. Having that, just what you said, that gradual little baby steps to help you just get there a little bit at a time. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a self grace you've got to give yourself, and it doesn't have to be a light switch kind of thing.
yes,
Anyways, I just felt the need to drive that home a little bit more
yeah,
because I feel like people will give that kind of grace to others, but they won't give it to themselves.
mm-hmm. That's so good. I'm glad you paused. That was a
I
really
had to.
important point. No,
I
it's good.
must.
And
Anyways, continue.
this last point is
Yeah.
expansion. So you learn that basic tendency, then you expand it. So I was listening
Mm-hmm.
to an interview of a man named Erwin McManus, and he's a pastor in California, I think, and I think he owns some businesses too. Like brilliant guy, great
Yeah.
communicator. He was on the Modern Wisdom podcast, and maybe I can link that in the show notes here as well, or the description underneath this podcast. But he said something. He's like, people think of him as being like this fearless guy. He's like, I'm really not. And he told the story. He said when he was little or young, he found himself just getting fearful about something, and
Mm-hmm.
like something bad would happen. He would never do it again. He'd be like, it was one time he was on a roller coaster and the seatbelt malfunctioned, and he thought I was going to fall out. So he like virtually
I
never
would probably also think that.
yeah, he never did roller coasters again, at least for a long time. And
Yeah.
there were several other things that he listed. That was one that stuck out to me. And he started to realize that he started to pile up these fears. Had a fearful
Mm.
experience, never going to do that again. Fearful experience, never going to do that again. And he's like, oh man, this is really like affecting me living fully in my life. I'm just crippled by fear. So he just said, I'm going to flip the script. and I'm going to try anytime that I'm fearful of anything, I'm going to move toward it. Doesn't mean necessarily like he did the thing, like I'm going to go ride a roller coaster right now, but he's going to do something that is, akin to I'm going to face the fear head on rather than running from it. So whatever it was like, oh, I'm really scared about this. Okay, I'm going to go face it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, so really? He's like, I'm not like courageous person. Like I'm typically really fearful, but I've just made this decision in my mind that I'm going to run towards fear instead of away from it.
Yeah.
And I just thought it's like, man, that is such a good maxim because he's telling us that he actually still really struggles with fear. But one experience was anytime I'm fearful, I shut down. The other aspect was like he actually changed his mind. Says when I'm fearful, I run to it,
Yep.
and he's finding more and more that when he runs to the thing, that it's not actually as scary and as terrible and as fearful as he originally thought. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's probably a general thing. So if you're listening into this podcast and you just feel kind of crippled by the past, you need to break free. Just remember that the past can be a lesson, but it's not a life sentence.
Yeah.
The future is a good possibility, but don't turn it into a prison. Live in the present moment and think, what can I do now in small, bite sized forms that if I continue to do them, it's going to lead to freedom.
Amen.
Any thoughts you want to share?
No, that was such a mic drop moment. I can't ruin that for you.
Mic drop. Yeah, I posted something that you did the other day. Did you see it on social? It was like mic drop. You were like saying something along
Oh yeah.
like living your life and to maximum instead of like wishing I could have lived this way and
Yeah.
living that moment.
Looking
Kind of
back
compares,
and
this
wishing it
kind
had
of
been
compares
different.
to this episode as well.
Yeah.
Anyways, we will probably do a couple more podcasts on starting again, just trying to dive deep into stuff that we all struggle with, really. And
Yep.
hopefully
And then we're gonna loop back into a health related subject
it'll be fun. It'll be
and
fun.
help you guys. If you're not sticking with your current New Year's resolutions, we're gonna talk about that.
Uh-oh. It's about
Yeah.
that time, too. Like mid to end February is the time.
Yeah. Usually the beginning of March is when a very large number of people drop off. Yep.
Yes. Well, it might be a good segue to help people not do that because though there's a lot of social media that makes fun of that kind of thing, I'm kind of like, I want to try to help as many people stay
Yeah.
in the groove, make life change for sure. Thank you guys
Yeah.
for joining, and we'll see you next time.